I thank the representative of Mozambique. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, at the very beginning of my statement, we would like to note the hypocrisy underlying today's meeting of Security Council on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. In April, we didn't have meetings on this topic for a month. There was no interest in the situation in Ukraine by France and Ecuador or other Western delegations, was not seen. But today we can see that EU members have lined up to read out their similar statements and tick that box. And this is yet another illustration of the fact that there is no genuine concern with the fate of people who live in Ukraine, and even less with those who live in the liberated territories of Donbass. Western delegations were not concerned about the situation of ordinary people there since 2014 either. Nor will we hear today, unfortunately, any expression of sorrow with the fact that on the 28th of April, Ukrainians once again conducted a horrendous shelling of Donetsk, and they were targeting a regular bus full of people. It burned out completely. 9 people died, including a child. Expertise showed that this shelling was conducted using high explosive missiles for MLRS manufactured in Slovakia. And the same shells are also being used to shell the Donetsk Cathedral during the Easter services. Our briefer today didn't say a word about that either. So where is your commitment to the protection of civilians then? Or are these the wrong kinds of civilians? The responsibility for these crimes belongs not only with the Kiev regime, but also with those who supply the regime with weapons. Furthermore, every day we think that the level of pumping Ukraine with weaponry has reached its limits. We receive new information about the new heavy and sophisticated weaponry from the West. MLRS, depleted uranium, long-range rocket systems, hundreds of tanks, etc. And we will revert to this issue in the course of the meeting that we requested on this topic on the 18th of May. All of this weaponry, which is being provided by some, including member states of Security Council, who are so concerned about the humanitarian consequences of the conflict in Ukraine, this weaponry on a daily basis kills civilians, women and children, destroy health facilities in DPR, Alera, Zaporozhye, and Kherson Oblast. The entire military potential of NATO is targeting them, and the Kiev authorities openly boast that legally they have the right to destroy everything that's located in these territories. Once again, we would like to say this to those who have said that already, will say this later on. The military of the Russian Federation is not fighting the civilians, and it's not subjecting them to targeted strikes, unlike the Ukrainian armed forces. The Western countries are well known for their love to the topic of the issue of combating impunity, especially if this does not cover their own crimes. They think they got away with the millions of civilians killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other countries. We are convinced that one fine day they will be held accountable for these. And no threats of sanctions against judges, as was the case with investigations of war crimes by the U.S. in Afghanistan, or intimidating witnesses or investigative reporters downplaying facts, will be of no help then. We can already see that developing countries are rejecting, those developing countries which are neutral in Ukraine, that they're rejecting the pressure being exerted upon them. And we are convinced that they are now tired of justifying every one of their steps and their appeals for peace. Annalena Baerbock recently said that the potential weapons supplies by third countries into Russia are unacceptable because they can be considered tantamount to participation in the conflict. Well, what about the fact that the entire military machine of the West is now fueling the war? This is yet another confession showing the West's participation in the conflict. With the forbearance of Western patrons, Kiev does not shy away from openly terrorist methods either. Amongst its crimes, the terror act against the Crimea Bridge, killing reporters such as Dugina, Maxim Fomin, and the attempt on the life of Zahar Prilepin, as a result of which his friend died. On the 3rd of March, the FSB informed us that they thwarted an attempt on the leadership of the Republic of Crimea. the Ukrainian MOD intelligence was involved in. And the chief of intelligence of Ukraine openly stated that they're ready to kill Russian nationals over the world. And the State Information Agency, Union of Ukraine, after the attempt, published a questionnaire asking who should be next. And if this is not incitement to terrorism, what is it? And how can the people of France, US, and other accept this? They know about terrorism firsthand. How can the Secretary General representative of other international organizations remain silent here? Madam President, we'll hear a lot today about the solidarity of Western community with Ukraine and the readiness to help Ukraine until the very end. But they need to understand that this support will lead the Ukraine to that very end. The external debt in 2022 rose to the level of $132 billion, or 89% of GDP, and it's forecasted that it will exceed 100% of the GDP by the end of the year. The whopping amounts given to Ukraine by the IMF, EU, and Washington, etc., lead it into indebtedness. All of that solidarity is not free of charge, and it will be ordinary Ukrainians who will have to pay back. But while the capital is flowing to the country, it's our understanding that its distribution will give to the American company BlackRock, and Kiev signed an agreement to that to launch a Ukrainian development fund. Under the cover of involving private investments for economy projects, what is happening is a transfer of state sovereignty under external control of a large investment fund with a headquarters in New York. We also stated earlier in the Security Council that in the past 10 years, the amount of Ukrainian arable land, which now under the control of American agro-industrial companies, is in excess of 4 million hectares. And the food supplies that were exported from Ukraine within the Black Sea Initiative were not being sent to the use of the starving countries, but for commercial deliveries. The West has always put its interests at the top of the list. So what we're witnessing once again is a turnover circulation of American money in the world. Most of us will return back to Western corporations. Some of it will remain the offshore accounts of Ukrainian and American bureaucrats. Some of this the Ukrainian leaders will not even be able to take with them when they leave the country in a hurry, as was the case with the former president of Afghanistan. The European countries are equally cynical. When the well-being of the farmers in the EU countries came into play, the situation changed. In April of this year, the countries, which because of solidarity corridors ended up with an oversupply of Ukrainian foodstuffs, introduced a ban on imports and in some cases a ban of transit of grain and other foodstuffs from Ukraine. A large part of Ukrainian food remains in the EU, even though they were initially intended for the global south. And this is a very good example of the essence of the humanitarian initiatives for Brussels. Let me recall here that the relaunching of the solidarity corridors was accompanied of measures to liberalize the Ukrainian export in the EU. It made it much easier to supply Ukrainian goods to the EU and not the markets of developing states. Madam President, Russia approaches the food situation of the world very responsibly, despite the fact that the global issues in the area of food security showed up long before the special military operation and were the consequence of the irresponsible monetary policy of Western countries and were worsened by the pandemic. Nonetheless, on the 22nd of July 2022, we positively reacted to the Secretary General's initiative. The main goal here was to ease the situation for food, with supplying foodstuffs and fertilizer to developing countries. A package deal on exporting foodstuffs and ammonia via Ukrainian ports and unblocking the grain and fertilizer export from Russia. But it did not go according to plan. As of the 4th of May, 40% of all production used from the sea humanitarian corridor it went into the U.S., and the share of the poorest country here is less than 3%. Less in a year, the agricultural goods from Ukraine are being used by the West. It is only As of the 18th of March, the beginning of the third stage of the initiative supplies to Africa went up by 40%. And this only became possible thanks to the efforts made by the Russian team at the Joint Coordination Center. They were the only ones who fought for, and even against the UN, to make sure that priority be given to the supplies, to the applications of ships going to Africa. The export of ammonia should have been launched at the same time with grain. This didn't take place. The Ukrainian side in the Joint Coordination Group refused to discuss the unblocking of the ammonia pipeline Tolyatti-Odessa, which is enshrined in the three-party agreement, came up with newer and newer conditions, which are not part of the initiative. For almost a year, we see that there has been no progress in the second part of the package deal between Guterres and MOU Russia-UN. The main Russian bank, Rossельhozbank, which is there to conduct financial transactions on export of foodstuffs, is under sanctions. One-off transactions which were promised by Washington and Brussels are laughable when they are presented as a solution to the problem. The package proposed by the Secretary General is only working on that part which deals with servicing Ukrainian commercial export. And Russian agricultural supplies continue being blocked by Western sanctions. There are no prospects for their easement under the supposedly exemptions for food and fertilizer. The United States and its satellites basically are imposing the topic that the world is in need of Ukrainian corn for animal feed more than it needs than Russian wheat and fertilizer. As we know, last week in Istanbul, four-party high-level talks on the future of the Black Sea Initiative took place, and contacts continue on this. But we'd like to recall here that already in March, at the time of the then extension, we warned if there is no progress on the 5 systemic issues blocking Russia agro supplies, we can't guarantee that the package agreement will be extended. I thank you.
Merci le représentant de la Fédération de Russie.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Madam President, sorry. I thank Mr. Martin Griffiths for his insightful briefing. It is with profound concern that we continue to witness Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, constituting a flagrant violation of international law, including the UN Charter. Russia should stop the war they started. The war they started. Japan denounces Russia's attacks on civilian infrastructure and urban centers across Ukraine. The attacks on housing complexes, hospitals, schools, energy facilities, and other essential installations for life jeopardizes the welfare and future of the Ukrainian people. We once again recall that indiscriminate attack on innocent civilian population constitute a war crime. There must be no impunity for war crimes and other acts of atrocities. Russia must be held accountable. We further condemn all violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses, urging all parties to the conflict to uphold international humanitarian principles. To restore a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, Japan is committed to the rapid recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. We will continue to steadily implement humanitarian, financial, and other assistance totaling $7.6 billion to support Ukraine in various fields, including electricity, mine actions, and agriculture. Madam President, challenges we face today are very complex, but Russia's aggression against Ukraine has exacerbated the global food security crisis and caused high inflation. To respond to this urgent issue, the Black Sea Grain Initiative has played a pivotal role in mitigating the repercussions on the world's food supply. The initiative has adeptly facilitated the export of over 30 million metric tons of grain from Ukraine ports, allocating over 56% of these food exports to developing countries. Consequently, the initiative has not only contributed to the reduction of global food prices, but also provided essential support to those severely affected by the war, particularly in developing countries. Japan commends the unwavering dedication of the Secretary General, Mr. Griffiths, and Ms. Greenspan to upholding the initiative's continuity and integrity. We also extend our appreciation to the government of Turkey for their diplomatic and operational assistance to the initiative. In line with the efforts to prevent further deterioration of food crisis, Japan actively contributes to providing emergency food assistance and enhancing the resilience of the international community, including vulnerable member states, and has so far committed over $250 million of assistance. It is truly regrettable that Russia opposed to a 120-day automatic extension of the initiative in March. It is also deeply concerning that since May the 1st, the JCC inspection rate has dropped significantly, indicating not only Russia's unwillingness to facilitate inspections and the movements of ships, but also the intention to suspend the initiative. The prospect of suspension is alarming, as it disregards the potential catastrophic consequences for global food supplies. To avert global hunger and tackle food insecurity, we must ensure the safe and smooth passage of vessels transporting grains, related foodstuffs, and fertilizers from designated Ukrainian ports by sustaining the initiative's operations. Japan calls on all relevant parties, particularly Russia, to act responsibly.
We heard the UN say
Their help when they're fleeing or remaining in place.
Been fought at all. Front of it efforts.
Briefing on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine and on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We regret that the pursuit of military solution to the conflict continues to take an intolerable toll in human lives, like in the airstrikes early this month in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, and the increased fighting in Bakhmut just last week. We express our solidarity to
all paying the increased price
of new appeals in favor
all paying the increased price. No one is paying more dearly.
Norms are all to understand
global food prices first.
The representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Undersecretary General Griffiths.
To be willing to understand the demands and concerns of all sides. The sooner we engage in this collective effort, the better. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Undersecretary General Griffiths, for your sobering remarks. First, let me underscore that every day Russia obstructs and threatens to suspend the Black Sea Grain Initiative, Russia raises global food prices around the world. This means higher prices for everyone, poor and middle-income countries, and the UN, which also procures food on the global market. We heard the UN say many times, as we heard from Undersecretary General Griffiths just now, that the initiative is critical to stabilizing global food prices and getting food to the world's hungry. Despite this, Russia has stopped discharging its commitments to the United Nations and Turkey. Russia has deliberately slowed the pace of vessel inspections and severely reduced the amount of grain leaving Ukraine's ports to help meet the needs of the world's most vulnerable. In recent weeks, on more than one occasion, the Russian Federation's delegation at the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul has refused to allow any inspection of ships. Now Russia is threatening to end its cooperation on May 18. And while Russia keeps Ukrainian grain supplies from feeding the hungry, Russia is successfully exporting its own bumper crop of grain. The Russian government regularly cites the need to implement its MOU with the UN on the export of Russian food and fertilizers. In that very MOU, Russia committed to, quote, facilitate the unimpeded export of food, sunflower oil, and fertilizers, unquote, from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Russia must implement its own commitments. Russia must stop holding global food security hostage to its cynical power plays and profit-taking. While we are all paying the increased price for Russia's actions, no one is paying more dearly than Ukraine. After 15 months and countless briefings, unfortunately, we are no closer to ending the humanitarian suffering caused by Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine. Instead, the death toll rises from Russia's missile and drone strikes on Ukraine's civilian population centers. From May 1 through 4, Russia launched more than 145 airstrikes across Ukraine. That translates into an average of more than one missile, drone, or bomb every hour, 24 hours a day, 3 days straight. In just those 3 days alone, Russia's attacks have killed and injured more than 100 civilians, including at least 5 children. Humanitarian organizations have reported worsening conditions in the frontline areas, and necessities such as electricity, food, and fuel are in short supply. President Putin's escalating attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure threaten us all. Russia's obstruction of the Black Sea Grain Initiative impacts the world's hungry. Russia has no interest in mitigating the spillover effects of its war against Ukraine, just as Russia has shown no genuine interest in negotiation or meaningful diplomacy. We call on Putin to stop holding the world's hungry hostage and extend and fully implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We again call on Russia to end its attacks on the people of Ukraine and withdraw its forces from Ukraine's territory completely. Russia alone has the power to end the war it senselessly started. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie
I thank the representative of the United States and now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And I thank USG Griffiths for his sobering briefing and for the work that he and his team are carrying out on the ground. The humanitarian situation in Ukraine has continued to deteriorate since the last time discussed by this Council. Over the past 50
law provides for
Malta services, crisis, criminal and before Russia collective
of the crisis continue
peace. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Malta. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I thank USG Griffiths for his briefing just now. The Ukraine crisis is still dragging on. The humanitarian situation remains extremely dire, and the spillover effects of the crisis continue to manifest themselves. The international community should take positive steps to mitigate the humanitarian consequences of the conflict and make joint efforts for the de-escalation of the situation and an early cessation of hostilities. First, every effort should be made to reduce the harm and suffering done to civilians. The international humanitarian law provides for the code of conduct that must be observed in situations of conflict. Parties to the conflict should spare no effort in protecting the safety of civilians and civilian facilities. Women and children are the most vulnerable groups in armed conflicts and must be given special attention. We welcome the expansion of aid to all affected populations and the facilitation of repair and restoration of civilian infrastructure by the international community, including humanitarian agencies, on the basis of neutrality and impartiality. China supports the balanced, full, and effective implementation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the MOU on the export of Russian food and fertilizers, and supports the UN in playing an important role in this regard to remove the real obstacles facing the export of Russian food and fertilizers. Second, the red line of nuclear safety must never be crossed. Nuclear weapons must not be used, and nuclear wars must not be fought. The safety and security of nuclear power plant facilities in Ukraine concern the safety and well-being of hundreds of millions of people. Any accident could cause incalculable humanitarian and ecological consequences. We call for maximum rationalness and restraint, and for avoiding words and deeds that could exacerbate confrontation and lead to miscalculations. China supports the Director General of IAEA in maintaining communication with Russia and Ukraine, and in playing a crucial role in safeguarding the safety and security of civilian nuclear facilities. Third, the spillover effects of the conflict response measures should be taken seriously and managed. The world economy is faced with renewed risks of recession, which calls for the coordinated actions by all countries to jointly keep global food, energy, and financial markets stable. However, one round of unilateral sanctions after another and ever-expanding long-arm jurisdiction have not only led to severe humanitarian consequences, but also undermined the global industrial and supply chains. The U.S. and other relevant countries should seriously reflect upon their behavior, immediately mend their ways, and create conditions for developing countries to grow their economies and improve livelihoods. They must refrain from engaging in economic coercion on one hand, and on the other, cooking up narratives accusing other countries of economic coercion. Unilateral sanctions have no basis in international law and are drawing the aversion and opposition from a growing number of countries. It must be pointed out that the so-called rules-based international order is likewise highly problematic in legal and practical senses. They are no excuse for the U.S. and other relevant countries to abuse unilateral sanctions and hardly enjoy broad support or recognition from the international community. Fourthly, and most fundamentally, the greatest sense of urgency is needed for the political settlement of the crisis. There are no simple answers to complex issues. Any comprehensive solution always begins with the first step, and the resumption of dialogue and negotiation cannot wait indefinitely. All parties should create conditions for advancing dialogue and negotiation instead of adding fuel to the fire and escalating tensions in an attempt to profit from it. On the Ukraine issue, China has always been on the side of peace, and everything we do is for the promotion of talks for peace. Ambassador Li Hui, Special Representative of the Chinese government on Eurasian affairs, has left today for visits to Ukraine, Poland, France, Germany, and Russia to engage with all parties on the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. We stand ready to work with the international community in the continued and tireless efforts towards the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and I join others in thanking Under-Secretary General Griffiths for his briefing and work on the ground. And your briefing today, Under-Secretary General, reminds us of the enormous cost of Russia's war of aggression. Russia has continued to conduct massive missile and UAV strikes against inhabited areas across Ukraine, killing innocent civilians. The UK is appalled by reports of recent Russian attacks on the Ukrainian Red Cross warehouses in Odessa and on a mobile hospital in Mykolaiv. There is no excuse for attacking the most vulnerable or the brave humanitarian workers who are supporting them. So we call on Russia to abide by international humanitarian law, in particular to observe the distinction between combatants and civilians. Ukrainian civilians, indeed all civilians, should be protected by all combatants. Similarly, aid organisations and aid workers, whose mission is to help innocent civilians in humanitarian need, are not a target. In Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine, an estimated 4 million people are living in dire, forlorn conditions. Despite regular attempts by the UN to gain access to deliver humanitarian support, Russia has never provided the necessary security guarantees for access. We continue to call for unimpeded and sustained humanitarian access to the people of Ukraine. We call on Russia to stop denying access and cease its attacks on critical infrastructure and residential areas. President, as we've heard from others, the BSGI is critically important. Over 30 million tonnes of grain and other foodstuffs have been exported under the initiative since the 1st of August. The deal has been critical to lowering global food prices and getting urgently needed grain to countries that need it most. As the World Food Programme has said, grain deliveries to any country drive global prices down. So we urge Russia to stop threatening to leave the initiative and instead to agree to a sustained and stable deal. In the meantime, Russia continues to block and delay ship inspections. This obstruction harms global food security by delaying shipments, restricting supplies, and keeping prices high for food importing countries. Finally, President, the UK is fully committed to holding Russia to account for its illegal actions in Ukraine. We will continue to support independent investigations into the atrocities committed in Ukraine as part of a just and sustained peace. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Madam President, I would like to join others in thanking Under-Secretary General Griffiths for his informative briefing today. Mr. Griffiths, your sobering report is not only a reminder of the importance of why we are here, but what we must do our utmost to avoid, losing our sense of urgency surrounding this conflict. Neither should we stand idly by as this war transforms into a protracted conflict of several years. The consequences are too grave for all of us. Yet fighting has been continuous and unending, with the price being paid by civilians who bear the brunt of the suffering. The scale of devastation and the dire humanitarian situation in Ukraine cannot be truly conveyed in the numbers we have heard today. In the past 14 months of war, there have been over 23,000 verified civilian casualties, and the actual figure is likely to be considerably higher. 18 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, more than 8 million people are refugees across Europe, and an additional 5 million people have been displaced inside Ukraine. Humanitarian access must therefore be ensured in order to allow much-needed aid to reach civilians caught in the fighting. In recent weeks, there has been a noticeable uptick of missile and drone strikes that have damaged or destroyed civilian infrastructure. Humanitarian facilities have been hit. Last week, a Ukrainian Red Cross warehouse and mobile health clinic were destroyed. We once again reiterate our call on the parties to the conflict to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law. Civilian objects must never be the target of an attack. The UAE continues to provide humanitarian assistance to those impacted by the conflict, including a donation of ambulances recently. We also continue to support civilian energy needs. We have sent 2,500 generators and are sending
that the Russian army applied.
It reached 1 million tons of grain have been shipped by the World Food Programme in support of its humanitarian operations in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Yemen. In view of its added value, the Black Sea Initiative must continue. We encourage all parties to redouble their efforts to find a lasting solution. We welcome the commitment of the Secretary-General and his representatives and the contribution of Turkey in this regard. Switzerland stands ready to provide its support, particularly in its role as host state. Excellencies, after 15 months of war, thousands of civilians are suffering from the devastating direct effects of the world. Thank you. I resume my functions as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Under Secretary General Griffiths. I also recognize the representative of Putin's regime in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. We meet to address the Russian war against my country after one of the lowest periods in the history of this Council, the April presidency of the aggressor state, which inflicted yet another blow on an already compromised principal body of the United Nations. This April alone, the Russian occupiers committed 6,139 war crimes. These crimes led to the death of 207 Ukrainian civilians, including 11 children. On the 28th of April, Russia again launched a missile strike on a multi-story apartment building, this time in Uman, Cherkasy region. As a result, 23 residents were killed, including 6 children. So much about Putin's envoy saying that they do not attack the Ukrainian civilians. Many of you have seen the heartbreaking video footage from Uman, where people desperately waited for hours near the rubble for their loved ones to be retrieved. In Russia, the TV audience watched this footage on the state propaganda channel Russia 1. Meanwhile, the Russia's Ministry of War posted on social media, "Right on target." Indeed, since day one of the Russian invasion, regardless of the torrent of lies from the Russia's representative in the Council, innocent civilians have been a deliberate target for Russian weapons and a permitted object for Russian crimes. Russism and its disciples, including in this chamber, have defied logic, all laws of non-contradiction, and all semblance of decency. 2 days later, on the 1st of May, another Ukrainian child, a 14-year-old boy, was killed in the village of Lizunivka, Chernihiv region, by a Russian air bomb that also destroyed the local school. This attack was another case of the cowardly and despicable terror tactics that the Russian army applies widely against the northern Ukrainian regions liberated a year ago, air bombing of Ukrainian border settlements from Russian airspace. Just like any other terrorist, the Russian servicemen do not care where these bombs finally fall. The main thing is that they must sow death and destruction. Terror against the liberated areas has become a hallmark of the Russian army. On the 3rd of May, in Kherson region alone, Russia killed 23 people. 49 were wounded in a store, railway station, gas station, their homes. On the 7th of May, a Russian missile strike damaged a mobile hospital in Mykolaiv region, which also belonged to the Red Cross of Ukraine. Since the beginning of the full-fledged Russian invasion, 25 facilities of the Red Cross of Ukraine have been damaged or destroyed. On the 9th of May, a massive barrage of 25 missiles slammed into the Ukrainian cities. The day before, on the 8th of May, Ukrainian Air Force were able to down all 35 Iranian drones launched by Russia. Also, on the 8th of May, Russian missiles completely destroyed a warehouse of the Red Cross of Ukraine in Odessa, with all the humanitarian aid there. One employee was killed. As a result of the attack, Odessa branch of the Red Cross of Ukraine was compelled to suspend the provision of humanitarian aid and the implementation of a number of humanitarian projects. We are grateful to our friends and allies who literally saved the lives of Ukrainians by helping us to reinforce our air defense. This enabled us to shoot down 23 out of 25 missiles. Yet more needs to be done to fully protect our skies and civilians. This weekend, Ukrainians also had to spend their time with air raid sirens sounding in the background as Russia launched massive new attacks using dozens of Iranian drones, cruise missiles, and S-300 rockets. The cities of Khmelnytsky, Ternopil, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, and Konstantinivka in Donetsk region suffered human casualties and serious damage to civilian infrastructure. Colleagues, in addition to the immediate harm caused to millions of Ukrainians by the Russian war, the long-term effects of displacement, trauma, and poverty will be felt for years to come. The most vulnerable suffer the most. Russia is violating the fundamental principles of child protection in wartime. As a result of the Russia's aggression, 480 children have been killed and 967 injured. To date, 13 cases of sexual violence against children have been verified by the Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine in Donetsk, Kyiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Chernihiv region. The real numbers are definitely higher, and our law enforcement continues the investigation. Russia's attacks have damaged 3,185 educational institutions, of which 330 were destroyed. In total, 1,412 healthcare objects and 577 healthcare facilities have been damaged, of which 258 facilities were destroyed. According to UNICEF country team report, education for an estimated 5.7 million children has been disrupted. 1.5 million children face mental health issues. The forceful deportation of children is nothing but a well-planned Kremlin policy aimed at aggressive indoctrination, ethnic identification change, and the deprivation of Ukraine of its future generation. To date, the Ukrainian authorities have identified 19,393 children deported or abducted to the Russian Federation or to the territories of Ukraine temporarily occupied by Russia. Nearly 4,390 of them are orphans or children without parental care. It has been possible to return only 364 children. We note with concern that Russia has reportedly intensified its deportation and abduction practices in the occupied territories under the guise of so-called evacuation. Like many of you in this Council, we reiterate that it is only Russia's troops that must be evacuated from the territory of Ukraine. As soon as this happens, the atrocities of war will be over. We welcome the well-founded conclusions of the reports by the Commission on Inquiry on Ukraine, established by the Human Rights Council, and by the OEC Moscow mechanism that have reconfirmed the enormous scale of violations and crimes committed by the Russian occupiers, in particular against children. We call on the Secretary General and the Special Representative on Children and Armed Conflict to give a proper assessment of the gravity of violations against children in Ukraine by the Russian government forces in the upcoming annual report. We believe that this report should contribute to ensuring accountability for perpetrators and justice for Ukrainian children, victims of the Russia's aggression. The invasion of the Soviet permanent seat in the Security Council should give neither immunity nor amnesty to war criminals. Madam President, we have already brought to the Council's attention the critical situation with mine contamination of Ukrainian lands. According to preliminary estimates, 180,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory are contaminated with mines and other explosive ordnance. Our primary task today is to accelerate the demining process as much as possible, increase the number of demining teams and equip them with special equipment. Unfortunately, those people who risk their lives to clear Ukrainian territory from mines and restore safety for people are also a target for the Russia's troops. Most recently, on the 7th of May in Kherson region, 9 members of a demining team were killed by Russian shells while on duty. The mine contamination in Ukraine is an issue for global food security, as more than 4,700 square kilometers of contaminated areas are agricultural lands. In such extraordinary circumstances, Ukraine continues to act as a reliable contributor to global food security by implementing its agreement with the United Nations under the Black Sea Grain Initiative and advocating for expanding its geographical scope by including new Ukrainian ports. As of the beginning of May, Ukraine exported 29.8 million tons of grain and foodstuffs. This number includes 600,000 tons of grain shipped by vessels chartered by the World Food Programme in support of its humanitarian operations in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Yemen. This volume could have been significantly higher if Russia did not resort to impeding practices. We are concerned that since the 1st of May, the inspection rate has dropped to an average of 2.9 inspections per day, compared to 6.6 in the period of August 2022, April 2023. As a result, in April, we were able to export through the grain corridor less than 3 million tons, which is only a half of our agricultural export capacities. Together with the United Nations and Turkey, Ukraine strives for the extension of the initiative without any delay and disruption to shipments. According to experts, if it is blocked by Russia, the global food prices could increase substantially again. This grim perspective should be taken seriously. It is disgusting that Russia still pretends to be on the losing side of the deal. I will not even remind the Council of the immorality of such complaints from the aggressor state, which has been and remains the only threat to food shipments in the Black Sea. Let us just turn to the data that clearly shows the benefits for Russia from the deal. The data indicates that Russian wheat export in January-February 2023 nearly doubled from the same period a year earlier. We therefore consider these speculations to be an attempt to whitewash Russian deliberate practices to weaponize food supplies, and we urge the international community to give a resolute response. Let me remind some statements here. Black Sea Grain Initiative is not due to expire this week. It is, however, the Russian blackmail deadline that expires this week. Madam President, a week ago, we paid tribute to the victims and heroes of the Second World War, marking the end of this war in Europe. The atrocities of this war prompted our predecessors to commit themselves to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Now in Ukraine, Russia reminds us that our commemoration slogan, "Never Again," is still a goal to be achieved. The lessons of the Second World War teach us that just and lasting peace can only be possible if evil is defeated and is not able to continue its aggression. Any attempt to appease the aggressor at the expense of its victims will only protract and broaden the scope of the tragedy. As my president said on the 8th of May, when Ukraine, along with the entire world, commemorated the victory over Nazism, we in Ukraine give meaning to these words, "Never again," not only to remember, but also to protect, not only to value life, but also to do the utmost to ensure that everyone who threatens life, everyone who brings aggression, everyone who resorts to terror against other nations, every such evil loses. Ukraine has committed to stop this modern evil of Russism. We are guided by the supreme principle of morality that is a categorical imperative since it is not conditional upon one's preferences. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement, and I'll give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Olav Skog, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Very much, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the potential candidate country Georgia, and the EFTA country Liechtenstein, member of the European Economic Area, as well as Andorra and Monaco, all aligned themselves with this statement. And I want to, like everyone else, first thank very much Under Secretary General Martin Griffiths for the briefing, and also, of course, to commend you and the UN system for the excellent work that you are doing on the ground, providing humanitarian assistance under very difficult circumstances in Ukraine and in many other places. The horrors that you, Mr. Griffiths, and others have described from inside Ukraine, resulting from Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military aggression, are unimaginable. For 15 months now, the Russian leadership has struggled without success to find any justification whatsoever for its illegal war of aggression. Russia must stop its war and immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw all of its forces and proxies from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Madam President, I will emphasize 3 points in my intervention. First, the importance of upholding international law and international humanitarian law. Second, the need for accountability. And third, efforts to address the global consequences of Russia's war of aggression. First, international law and international humanitarian law must be respected. Therefore, Russia must